everyone. With greetings and welcome to the esteemed audiences. We are here again on the second day of the International Conference on Terrorism, state and non-state sponsored versions. As you witnessed in yesterday's program, we had the presentations of Dr. Reza Sadeqi, head of the Yasin think tank from Iran, Mohammad Reza Torabi, one of the children of MEK members from Germany, Senator Richard Black, the Republican Senator of the United States, Dr. Leonid Savin, the head of Geopolitical news agency from Russia, Dr. Olsi Jazari, a historian, university professor and researcher from Malaysia, and Dr. Daniel Perra, a journalist and political analyzer from Italy. On the second day, we have valuable speakers from different countries whose names will be as follows. Mr. Gjergji Thanasi, an investigative journalist and political commentator from Albania, Mr. Yaqub Meraji, a separated member of the terrorist group of MEK from France, Mr. Giulio Chinappi, journalist, political analyzer, and founder of World Politics blog website from Italy, Dr. Bobana Andjekovic, journalist, commentator, and expert of geopolitical issues from Serbia, Dr. Robert Fantina, university professor, writer, and reporter from Canada, Professor Bashir Bellah, a historian, university professor, and writer from Algeria, and Dr. Morigi, author, archaeologist, journalist, and religious researcher from Italy. And the last but not the least, Professor Lorenzo Pacini, university professor, writer, and researcher from Italy. Thank you very much.
When I see this American politician talking about MEK and meeting with them and consider them as alternative or freedom fighter, an alternative to Iranian government.
There is a viable opposition to the rule of the Ayatollahs.
I remember and I think of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We all remember that Al-Qaeda at the time of Russia was created and held by US, CIA, or Bush's family or all that. What it comes to my mind is enemy of my enemy is not my friend.
Regime change. Regime change.
Enemy of my enemy is our worst nightmare.
State and non-state terrorism. State terrorism is a term that refers to the interference of the states or governments in the internal or external affairs of another government by implanting or participating in terrorist operations or supporting military operations to weaken and overthrow the governments or the entire governing body of that country. The Zionist regime of Israel, during its 75 years of life full of war, bloodshed, and aggression, is the most obvious symbol of state terrorism in the world. This regime, which was established in 1948, needed warmongering to continue its survival and expansion. For this reason, it created terrorist groups and militias alongside its fully armed army, whose aim was to assassinate the Palestinians and even the people of other countries. The assassination squads of the Zionist militias used to carry out many violent and terrorist acts in order to accelerate the Zionist domination of the Palestinian lands. Some experts have distinguished between state terrorism and state support for terrorism. According to them, state terrorism is the use of terror and threats by the government against its own citizens of other countries. In contrast, state support for terrorism means support through training, arms, money, or asylum. as a means of advancing the state's foreign policy. One of the most common definitions that can be given is that state terrorism is the knowing use of violence or the threat of such violence by agents of a government or its appointees against individuals or groups intended to threaten or intimidate the general public. Therefore, the direct victims are not the primary targets, but rather a means of threatening a wider target that is threatened by the message of that violence. The purpose of the applied violence is to achieve political or even economic objectives. But it seems that in today's world, even separating state terrorism from non-state terrorism does not have a rational and correct basis, let alone trying to separate a state terrorism from a state support for terrorism. This is just a form of self-deception and playing with words. Providing material and spiritual aid such as political support, media, etc. through governments to opposition groups, and participating in operations such as bombings, kidnappings, hijacking planes, and assassinating ordinary people and government officials are examples of state terrorism. It is worth nothing that in many cases governments try to introduce these terrorist groups as freedom-fighting groups and even political parties. But what we see in the obvious examples of these governments supporting terrorist groups active in other countries is a hypocritical behavior. These governments sometimes admit that the groups they support are terrorists in the official documents of their research institutes and security institutions, a bitter and painful confession that is not accompanied by a change in the support approach of these governments towards the mentioned terrorist groups. The Mojahedin-e-Khalq MEK group is a clear example of a state terrorism in the guise of political organization. One of the most obvious examples of state terrorism is the terrorism of some Western countries against Iran, the apparent showcase of which is the Mojahedin-e-Khalq MEK MKO PMOI. Mojahedin-e-Khalq, who targeted officials and heads of the system in the 60s, also committed another crime, massacre of innocent people. All over the pages of Iran's history, there are names of men, women, and children who have been victims of MEK assassinations without any political background. MEK terrorists took responsibility for the assassination of 4,583 Iranian citizens only between April 11th and March 1983. The Terror Spring Foundation plans to hold a virtual conference, State and Non-State Terrorism, to investigate the widespread crimes of some terrorist states and seemingly independent terrorist groups that receives all their logistical, military, and media equipment from the terrorist states that supply them. The terrorist group of the Mojahedin is one of the strong and convincing documents that reveal the link between apparently non-state terrorism and state terrorism, the support of France, America, and Albania in equipping and organizing these terrorists. This group, which is now supported by the United States, assassinated 6 American military advisors and in addition, the group cooperated with Saddam Hussein, the infamous dictator of Iraq. In the massacre of Iraqi Kurds in Operation Morvarid 1 and 2 and Iranian Kurds in Operation Mersad or Furugh Javidan caused the United States and the European Union to register this group in their list of foreign terrorist organizations, FTO. Mandatory divorce, Masoud Rajavi's tactic to dominate the members of the MEK. The slogans and contents of their publications said that women's rights violated by men should be returned to them, and the role of women in democracy and social issues should be determined. Slogans that were big and captivating for those early days of the revolution when young people were full of passion and idealistic feelings. But the tragedies suffered by women in the People's Mojahedin-e-Khalq organization have happened in a very few groups and cults. Soldier women who soon realized that the organization is going to take away all femininity, motherhood, and even the right to have a wife and family from them. Mrs. Zahra Mirbagheri, a former member of the Mojahedin organization who was interviewed for a documentary, has a list of some of her friends who had their limbs forcibly removed from their bodies. This issue and this oppression of women has not happened in almost any group or sect. To the extent that the female gender has been oppressed in the People's Mojahedin-e-Khalq organization, this may not have happened anywhere else. Captivity and child soldiers of MEK members' children. By the decision of the heads of the MEK in 1991, about 500 children and teenagers who were the children of MEK members were separated from their parents and sent to Europe. Many of them were displaced in the streets or European countries. Some of them were entrusted to child care centers, and some were sold to European families. It has led to addiction, and some have committed suicide. Some of these children who were sent to Europe as children had become teenagers. They were teenagers between 14 and 16, and at this time, the People's Mojahedin organization returned them to Iraq with tricks and lies to meet their families in Camp Ashraf, which is against international law and is considered a kind of kidnapping. Some of the children who were brainwashed into Iraq were no longer allowed to live and were considered captives. All these crimes were carried out with the support of Western terrorist governments, especially France and the United States, and Masoud Rajavi's confession that the terrorist crimes of this group in the assassination of Iran's political officials and ordinary people were carried out with the full knowledge of the French officials and under their support testifies that these governments are clear examples of state terrorism. Also, the influence of the MEK in the governmental and military institutions of Albania, with the support of the American embassy in this country, has dragged Albania into a spiral of silence. And, despite the damages and costs that the sheltering a notorious terrorist group has had for Albania, the political officials of Albania have so far not stopped supporting this terrorist group. Western governments' support of terrorism in the Middle East, especially in Iran, as well as the cultivation of ISIS in Syria and Iraq by the United States and Israel, according to the admission of their senior government officials, prove that the Zionist regime of Israel is a vivid example of state terrorism. It supports all the terrorists of the world, directly and indirectly. Today, the Zionist regime of Israel has committed the largest and most heinous crimes in the world against the oppressed Palestinian people and has violated the most obvious laws of human rights. But no action has been taken by Western countries, supporters of this example of state terrorism against Israel. As a result, it can be said that there is almost no terrorist group that does not have the support of a Western government, and these groups are always a miniature example of Western colonialists throughout history. In fact, non-state terrorism is the same state terrorism in which governments try not to reveal their support as much as possible in order to preserve their reputation and credibility.
Okay, today's first speech is Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini, a university professor, writer, and researcher from Italy, and we invite you to listen to his speech. Thank you very much.
Dear friends present at the conference, it's a great pleasure for me. I'm Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini from Italy, Associate Professor in Political Philosophy and Geopolitics. Today, I really would like to give a quick look about the importance of the political cooperation in terrorism. As we know, the movement of Mojahedin-e-Khalq, the MEK, is enough supported in all the European contexts, especially in the Italian Republic, where the government of Giorgia Meloni now and other governments in the past gave a support to the international terrorism of MEK. And this is a problem, in my opinion, that is occurring to the recognition of the MEK as a terrorist group. So we would like to say it's an epistemological and methodological problem that is actually based on a different doctrine of recognizing international terrorism. As we know, Italy and the other European countries are down of the control of the United States of America by the North Atlantic Treaty. So the kind of decisions that are taken for strategy and defense are in the most part of times managed by foreign authorities with an ingerence in the national affairs. This is the same for terrorism, where we have adopted totally and subscribed the orders and the system of recognition and description managed after the 11th of September 2001, after the events of New York with the Twin Towers, where after the presidential military order managed by President Bush of the United States, the Italian Republic received the document, and after that moment, all the studies, all the development, all the research dedicated to international terrorism decided to follow that document as the main guide, we could say as a manual, of the description of the international terrorism. So we could say this is a huge problem because we didn't develop until now a kind of autonomy in the studies of international terrorism. A problem that I can see in that document for our kind of internal politics, public affairs, is that it is completely unlinked with our tradition in fighting the internal terrorism and in the epistemological development of a theory about terrorism, but especially, we should say, looking to the operativity of that theory. This means that when I say that we adopted totally a system that is exogenous by our society, by our community, we did it missing the metabolizing of that system by ours. And in this sense, we had a huge discrepancy between the two systems. What I can see now is that because of this dependence by a foreign system, we are not able, in a theoretical way and in a pragmatical way, to define our own methodology for international terrorism. This has been very clear in the speeches that the Italian politicians had to the European Parliament and to the Italian Parliament too, along the last 5 years. But I could also quote 2018, so just 6 years ago, when the Italian Foreign Affairs Ministry represented to European Union a kind of description of the MEC that is actually not following the truth of that. When some journalists asked why and what about that kind of words spent for this group that was, we could say, positively described by the minister, he answered that we didn't have enough information to build our own methodology and doctrine about it. This is, in my opinion, a huge problem that we should fight, because for the international cooperation, the understanding and the recognition of what is actually a true terroristical problem and what is not is central to establish the cooperation, especially between the intelligence corps and the defense corps. What we see now is that Italy is completely losing the direction, and in foreign affairs, more than in the past, we are following the orders of a foreign country, that is the United States of America, and also the European Union as a partenariat, where there is no consideration of the autonomies of the European countries in developing international relations, geopolitics, and of course, the studies about international terrorism. So, going in conclusion, I would like to say to all the speakers, the present at this beautiful conference, it's important to make a pressure on Italian authorities and in the international cooperation with all the links that everybody of us we have, both to Italian government and to European Parliament, to spread a kind of information not submitted and controlled by the propaganda set by the Anglosphere. Because without this chance, without catching this chance, we are running the risk of having no more the possibility of talking about the authentical risks of international terrorism. And the worst problem would be to establish a stronger cooperation with those groups without the chance of going out from the responsibilities, and I would like to say responsibilities we will be called to answer to the history, to God, and also to the future generations. Because actually Italy is welcoming a lot of migrants, and as the statistics already said, the possible number of terrorists inside of them is more than of the half of percentile. This means, in my opinion, that we are deliberately running the possibility, the risk to become partners in this crime behind the mask of defending our nation, our people, and our continent of Europe by the risk of terrorism. To finish, really to conclude, I would like to spend a few words about the example that can give to the Italian people the character of General Qasem Soleimani. His memory, his action, his activity in the context of fighting the Islamic State terrorism, and especially for the united cooperation of the axis of resistance, is a pragmatic example of the possibility of going over of the mutual differences and contrasts, just to unite for a common cause, for a common direction, to solve a lot of the problems that, because of the Western hegemony of the Anglosphere, we are every day living here. Thank you so much to all the friends. Please always remember Italy as a country that is welcoming you. Also, if governed by people that sometimes could see you as enemies, but remember that for all the people, we will always be friends, brothers and sisters. Thank you so much, everybody.
A special thanks to Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini for his valuable speech. Okay, the next speech of today's conference is Mr. Gjergji Thanasi, a historian and political analyzer and commentator of geopolitical issues from Albania, that we invite you to listen to his speech. Thank you.
Hello. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Gjergji Thanasi. I am an Albanian journalist specialized in investigative journalism. I would like to discuss with you the problem of the financing of a terrorist organization, or to play by the book, the next terrorist organization, whose name is MEK, Mojahedin of the People, Mojahedin-e-Khalq, PMOK, and other acronyms. In 2013, Premier Berisha allowed 200 of them to come from Baghdad to Tirana and to settle in the outskirts of Tirana. It was a kind of favor he did to the Americans. In 2016, Premier Edi Rama allowed some 3,000 of them to come from Ashraf, from Liberty Camp in Iraq to the outskirts of Tirana. It was an agreement between Albania and the United Nations, backed and brokered by United States. They were allowed to come after Foreign Secretary Kerry visited Tirana. in autumn 2017, I was the first journalist to break the news on Albanian media that these Mujahideen are being transferred from the outskirts of Tirana to a camp in Manas. Manas is a township in the municipality of Durrës, and it is rather strategically placed, as Manas is almost in equidistance from Tirana, capital city, Durrës, the second city of Albania and the biggest port, and also Rinas Airport, which up to 2 years ago was the only civilian airport in Albania. Now, how this camp has to do with financing terrorism? Well, we have to deal first about figures. How much did it cost the construction of the camp? They bought bit by bit 30,000 square meters of land, and they have also rented some patches of land around the camp. At first it was rather cheap, then Albanian peasants, local peasants, thought, why should we not raise the prices, as these people have money, I mean Rajavy-Khalq. So the price of 30,000 square meters plus the cost of construction. There were housing dormitories for 2,000 persons, cheap construction. There were places to cook. There were first aid stations, different storerooms, big storerooms, even a kind of facility for purifying water, because they are very, how can I say, very concerned with the security. They think Iran will poison their water supply and things like this. And all this costs money. There are also special buildings in this closed compound, in this gated compound. The museum, it has a high cost because special building materials, marble and things like this. The hall, it is a concert hall, a meeting hall, quite big, for several thousand people, several thousand seats in it. Also, there is a VIP section in the camp with villas, very nice villas, with special construction material used to construct these villas. Plus, they have used a lot of special cement, we call it Portland 500 cement, to construct air raid shelters in the camp, and all this costs money. Plus the fence, the guard towers, the main gate, and other facilities in the camp. I'm not speaking here of bitumen paved lanes and flowers and plants they planted there, etc., etc. It is a lot of money. A conservative value of the camp is more than 100 million euros. There is a question, a very obvious one. How such a quantity of money reached Albania? Such money came to Albania through the banks or in suitcases. Thanks God, Albania has got a very tough anti-laundering law. How such people bypassed such a law? This is a very important question. Plus, where did they find that quantity of money? And we are speaking only of the construction of the camp. They say it is crowdfunding, meaning that Iranians in diaspora pay money to construct the camp, to maintain the Mujahideen here in Albania, etc., etc. But it is a fact that not all the Iranians in diaspora are fans of Rajavy-Khalq. There are people who are loyal to Islamic Republic of Iran. There are people who, with a lot of difficulties, make ends meet in abroad, meaning in Europe, Canada, USA, Australia, etc. There are people who send money to their families in Iran, and families have got a priority over Rajavy-Khalq, remittances, you know the remittances. And there are also people who are loyal or nostalgic to Pahlavi dynasty and they hate the guts of Rajavy-Khalq. So the pool Rajavy-Khalq can have its money is rather restricted. The problem is how they manage to have such amounts of money and to transfer that amount of money to Albania. Remember these questions, please. They are important. Now, construction is over. Let us speak of living costs. There are around 2,000 persons there, because around 3,000 came here, 500 according to Judge Dedai, who is a judge of the Special Court Against Corruption and Terrorism. 500 of these ex-Mujahedin went to European countries illegally. Plus, dozens and scores of them defected from the camp. Some of them went to Europe illegally. Others stay in Tirana, but they receive a living allowance, a little more than 300 euros per month from Rajavy-Khalq, and others have abandoned the cult, hate the cult, and they joined Asila Association, a legally recorded, registered association in Albania, an Iranian-Albanian association. So let us say there are 2,000 persons there. Even Albanian authorities do not know how many there are there, but this is something else. So you have to provide 3 meals per day per 2,000 persons, 365 days a year. Let us say $10 per person per day. It is $20,000 per month. Only food plus medicine. Most of them are elderly people. There are a lot of people who are ill. Over 100 have already died because of COVID or illness or things like this. A couple of them maybe were murdered by the cult, very suspicious deaths, etc., etc. So, medical care costs. Of course, they have smuggled medicine in Albania. There is proof about this. For example, during COVID-19 pandemics, Italian authorities arrested 2 elderly Iranians, members of Rajavy-Khalq, who were trying to smuggle vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, from Germany to Italy to board the ferry boat to Durrës. So at least we have proof that they have engaged in smuggling medicine to Albania. So the cost of medical care. Plus, they are paranoid about security. They've hired an Albanian private company, RB Shpk, and they have 24 hours a day armed guards with pistols and assault rifles. At the main gate, manning different guard towers, plus there is a kind of tactical group in reserve in case something sinister happens to back the guards, etc., etc. And it costs money. The same question, what is the origin of these sums of money? How such a quantity of money enters Albania? Okay, what else? They have indulged in Minds and Hearts campaign. They have distributed hundreds of prescription glasses to elderly people in need, free of charge. And glasses cost money. Even if you buy them in Germany and smuggle them into Albania, buying them in Germany costs money, even if they are Chinese-made glasses. They have distributed food parcels to people in need in the township of Manas. They have also created a ring of local spies, and this is highly illegal in Albania. It is a crime, a felony in Albania, because they want to have their spies in Manas, and not only in Manas, to protect themselves from the Iranian regime and the Iranian spies and terrorists in Albania, blah, blah, blah. And spies need to be paid. More expenses. utilities, water, electricity, internet. They have dedicated lines of internet because internet is one of their weapons. They wage war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. So they use internet as a weapon to fight their homeland, their own people. Okay, this is their business. That's why they are also a danger and security threat to my Albania. So they organize visits, goodwill visits. They were present, for example, wining and dining, hotels, airfare, cars to transport them from Tirana to Manas. All these cost money for these VIPs and ex-VIPs. And if we speak of a retired 4-star US general, you cannot use a Tata car to transport him from hotel to Manas. It takes a Mercedes and it costs money. So these are other money they spend. I'm not speaking here of the money they spend to buy people in Iran, to use them for terrorist acts and to pay them for whatever they do, setting fire portraits or attacking courthouses or blowing a gas pipe and things like this. Maybe such amounts of money do not come first to Albania and they go to Iran. Maybe they go directly from foreign countries to people in Iran. But it costs money, the internet they buy, the supply of the internet, the access to internet they have here in Albania to continue with their activities. Activities which cause destruction and sometimes even deaths in Iran. So the problem is all this money. What is the origin? How it enters in Albania? It is very, very dark. Why? This camp uses the standard of animals farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than the others, meaning the animals of Ashraf's camp are more equal. They disregard Albanian law if such a law goes against their interests. So, if it's not allowed to launder money in Albania, okay, we don't care. We bring the money, we launder them, we do whatever it is. Because they have never ever been punished for breaking Albanian law. There have been attempts to put them to prison for a few days. A couple of women, members of Reza have been to prison for such offenses as human smuggling people into and out of Albania, money laundering, even setting up gangs of burglars, very important commanders in this cult, Reza cult, yet none of them has been sentenced to anything. Out of my personal experience, in August 2022, a bunch of Reza cult members came from Manas to Durrës, 25 kilometers or so away, and they attacked an official book fair. They attacked the book fair because Asila, this Iranian Albanian association, had rented, I personally rented it, a stall. And we have a modest display of books published by Asila. They attacked it, they used violence, they kicked the books from the stall, they trampled upon the books, including Quran, because we had published also the Holy Quran, we as Asila Association. They attacked the police, of course, members of Asila. We went to police, we made written complaints, police kept them for less than 12 hours, then let them free, and a judge, her name is, not a judge, sorry, a prosecutor, her name is Tauta, closed the case. Not enough proof. There were dozens of videos of their violence, photos and things like this. They even attacked the Albanian flag, and it is a felony, a very grave crime to attack the Albanian flag here in Albania. Mr. Mersuli, the head of Asila Association, protected the flag with his own body. Yet the case was closed, not enough evidence. It was public, in daylight, recorded in several videos, dozens of videos. So, they have never ever been punished, sentenced to a crime in Albania. In 2017, the General Directorate of Anti-Money Laundering charged them or sued them on money laundering charges. It was a little more than 1 million euros. The judge closed the case, though there was a lot of evidence that 1 million euro had come to Albania from problematic sources. The judge closed the case, and it is something classified, this case, all the materials of this case, on very special grounds, animal farm, you remember. These are freedom fighters, they cannot launder money. Okay? An ex-terrorist cult have become freedom fighters. They cannot launder money. They are good guys. So, there was a very strange case of a Saudi company in Albania. The name of the company is Al-Shidi Group. They received from Albanian government the privilege of being a strategic investor, and there are a lot of privileges if you got this strategic investor, because they were going to invest 106 million euros in a project called Tirana City Center, a skyscraper. They were going to construct apartments, a big shopping mall, and things like this. This company is believed, but it is very difficult to find hard evidence, that it donated out of their kind heart money to Rajavi cult. This Al-Shidi group is a little bit problematic, because it has invested in other countries in the Balkans, for example in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They constructed a Sarajevo city center in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they bought a company called Magroš Veletrgovina. Over 90% of the shares of this company. They also invested in creating airlines, Fly Bosnia airline, connecting Bosnia with Saudi Arabia. But the small shareholders of Magroš Veletrgovina company sued and accused Al-Shidi group in Bosnia of money laundering. Maybe in Bosnia they were bad guys, in Albania were good guys. It happens. So this company now is not anymore a strategic investment in my country. Premier Rama signed a decree to nullify this strategic investment title given to such a company. It is very opaque, very dark, the sources of investment. There is a certain, how can I say, censorship in my country, though we pretend to be a European country, a democratic country, etc., etc. If you mention the name of a state quite famous in the world, because this state punches much more above its weight in international arena. If you mention these states, you risk prison. And by the way, out of my personal experience, from 2019, the Counter-Terrorism Directorate, part of Albanian State Police, is trying to put me into prison. They have failed, and I've published a lot of documents, some received from a hackers group called Homeland Justice. Some I managed to find myself. These documents are very interesting, how they tapped my phone, how they checked my bank accounts to find Iranian money transferred to me to become an Iranian spy or an Iranian terrorist and other stupidities. So I'm not mentioning that state who is believed to finance now, after the Saudi Arabia thing has dwindled or closed down, because I risk a lot and I do not want to mention something without having a document, a written document. But in case money are transferred in suitcases, there are no written documents. We have to do with gentleman's agreement or an agreement between a black lady like Rajavi, Mariam Rajavi, and that state entity, very special nowadays. I do not want to mention its name because I risk a lot, and I'm not prepared to risk that much without being sure that I can make a contribution to the security of my country. So, this is the problem with MEK, with Rajavi cult in my country. They disregard Albanian law, they can launder money, they can do anything, even in cases when there is an investigation, or even when they are charged, the case closes down and they escape scot-free. Imagine 2,000 people, living expenses, the construction of the camp, the campaigns they undertake, Mind and Hearts campaign, buying politicians, buying Albanian journalists, all these are illegal, highly illegal here, creating spy rings, of course, to protect themselves from Islamic Republic of Iran, okay, but it is illegal in Albania to create spy rings. So, don't ask from me more info how the money comes to Albania and what is the source of the money. We are speaking here of tens of millions every year. And it is an organization, it is a sect. It's not a state budget. The lies about crowdfunding from Albanian diaspora are total lies. Nobody believes them. So I can only, the only thing I can do is to try to make aware my people and also Albanian politicians that this cult, Rajavi cult, hold in Manus, and the inmates of Ashraf 3 camp there in Manus are a constant security risk for my country. I hope other journalists in Albania and abroad will shed more light on the sources or the sources of the finances of this ex-terrorist group, now I believe changed into a very sinister and dangerous cult, the Rajavi cult. Thank you very much.
Okay, we thank Mr. Thanasi for his valuable speech, which undoubtedly provided us with valuable information about the crimes of the terrorist group of MEK in Albania. On the second day of International Conference of Terrorism, state and non-state sponsored versions, we have Mr. Yaqub Meraji, a separated member of the MEK from France, and we invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you.
We trust in the God. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's really difficult to explain my opinion about MEK, a terrorist group whose name is Sazman Mojahedin-e-Khalq. So I prefer to explain about this MEK in Persian, whose is very powerful language to describe this organization. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. سازمان مجاهدین خلق در ایران به گروهک منافقین شناخته میشه. همونطور که در لوگوی این سازمان پیداست، گروهی هستند که به مبارزه مسلحانه اعتقاد دارند و با چاشنی کمی اسلام و بیشتر مارکسیسم مسئله ایدئولوژیکی را هم به نام مذهب پیش میبرند. این گروهک معتقد است که در جریان انقلاب اسلامی سرش کلاه رفته و از قدرت کنار گذاشته شده. به همین دلیل برای گرفتن تمام یا بخشی از قدرت در دوران جمهوری اسلامی متوسل به سلاح و گروه‌های فشار شد که البته ره به جایی نبردند. و عاقبت در دام مشکلاتی که خود آن را به وجود آورده بودند گرفتار شدند و اکنون در وضعیتی بغایت تحت فشار نیروهایش روزگار پایانی را در آلبانی به سر میبرند. ناگفته نماند روزانه نیز نفر یا نفراتی از گروهک سربنیست میشوند و این عاقبت خیانت به ایران و اسلام و آرمان عدالت خواهیه. در زمان دفاع مقدس به خوبی یادم هست که همین سازمان اطلاعیه میداد که هواداران ما در عملیات‌های مختلف چندین تانک و چندین نفربر و ادوات مختلف نظامی که میبایستی علیه نیروهای صدام حسین به کار گرفته میشد خراب کردند و مثال میزد شن ریختن توی باک تانک ها یا عملیاتی از این دست، تا اینکه با فراخوان مسعود رجوی نیروهای سازمان به عراق منتقل شدن و به طور دربست در اختیار استخبارات عراق و صدام حسین و به اصطلاح لشکر خصوصی فارسی زبان صدام حسین تبدیل شدند که در این راه از هیچ جنایت و خیانت و خباثتی فروگذاری نکردند تا اینکه جنگ کویت پیش آمد. به هر حال این سازمان بایستی به نوعی هزینه‌های خیانت به ایران رو پرداخت میکرد و چالش‌های جنگ ائتلاف غربی علیه صدام دامن این سازمان رو هم گرفت. سازمان برای خدمتگزاری تمام عیار به غرب و نماینده‌اش صدام حسین اقدام به اعزام کودکان اعضای خودش به خارج از عراق کرد و نهایتاً چند سال بعد به بهانه‌های مختلف بخشی از این کودکان رو که اکنون در سنین جوانی و نوجوانی بودند به لطایف الحیل به عراق فراخوند و به کار گرفت. این رویه تروریستی ادامه داشت و در جنگ دوم خلیج فارس آمریکا صدام را پس از مصرف از قدرت خلع کرد و در این مقطع مسعود رجوی گفت که صاحب و فرمانده ما تغییر کرده و از این پس باید با آنها کار کنیم. پایه‌های وجودی این سازمان از ابتدا دروغ و تهمت به این و آن گروه بود و از این راه نسبت به نگهداری اعضای فریب خورده بهره زیادی برد. اما این پایان ماجرا نیست و نبود. سازمانی که ذاتاً شکافزی بود و اکنون با امپریالیسم آمریکا و صهیونیسم جنایتکار نرد عشق میبازه و خود رو تماماً در اختیار سازمان‌های اطلاعاتی غربی قرار داده و از همون رویه‌های تروریستی سابق استفاده میکنه. حالا چون سلاح دستشون نیست با اطلاعات کم و بیشی که از ایران به دست میاره سعی میکنه چوب تحریم ها رو علیه ایران و حربه تحریم ها رو علیه ایران اسلامی به کار بگیره. در جریان جنگ اخیر غزه این سازمان تماما در اختیار اسرائیل جنایتکار در اومد و پوشش خبری گسترده از درگیری ها به نفع اسرائیل جنایتکار در رسانه‌هاش اعلام میکرد بی محابا و به طور رسمی بخشی از نیروهای گردان یا گروهان 8200 اسرائیل در اومد. همگان به خوبی میدانند که عاقبت خیانت به منافع ملی کشور ایران آوارگی و بدبختی و ذلته و سازمان مجاهدین خلق هم از این قاعده مستثنا نیست. یا همون منافقین مصداق بارز همین هستند و روزگار پایانی به شدت مبهم رو در آلبانی سپری می کنند و تماما به خصوص در دوران اخیر تماما با به اصطلاح فرانسوی کاکوفونی و هیاهوی تبلیغاتی ارتزاق میکنن که اون هم البته دوام نخواهد داشت. سازمان و اعضای اون که اخیراً در دادگاه‌های ایران محاکمه شدند و یا روند محاکمهشون ادامه داره، در خارج نیز اونطور که این حقیر اطلاع دارم تعدادی از اونها در لیست اینترپل هستن و به خصوص اونایی که در فرانسه هستن خب از مریم قجر گرفته تا بقیه حق خروج از کشور رو ندارن مگر اینکه به طور قاچاقی که اینا استادش هم هستن بره به آلبانی و یا جای دیگه. هر ترتیب ننگ و نفرت بر این سازمان که به خصوص منافع ملی کشورمون رو به بازی گرفت و به قول معروف به خاطر یک دستمال حاضر قیصریه رو به آتش بکشه. این ذات مسعود رجوی و اون دار دسته پلیدشن که بیشتر همون حلقه اولیه سازمانه. البته الان دیگه پیر شدند و انتظار مرگ رو میکشن. از سازمان مجاهدین خلق یا همون منافقین بیشتر از این انتظار نمیره و پایان بدشون رو ملت ایران و خانواده معظم شهدا انتظار میکشن. روز بخیر، خدا نگهدار شما.
Many thanks to Mr. Yaqub Meraji for his valuable speech, and we hope that this conference can take an effective step to inform the people and especially the French politicians about the terrorist group of the MEK. The next speaker of today's conference is Mr. Giulio Chinappi, journalist, political analyzer, and founder of World Politics blog website from Italy, and we invite you to listen to his speech. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Giulio Chinappi. I'm the founder of a website called World Politics blog, which analyzes the main topics of world politics from a non-aligned perspective. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about this very interesting topic. In particular, I would like to address the wrong perception Western people have of terrorism and the hypocrisy and double standard that Western countries, in particular the United States of America, use as a means of political propaganda. On Western media, we often hear people talking about terrorism. However, a clear definition of terrorism is never given, and this word is usually applied to those countries or organizations that challenge the Western-led world order. According to Edward Herman, the definition of terrorism is not clear because the powerful define terrorism, and they define terrorism in order to exclude their own acts from the definition of terrorism. What is interesting is that Herman wrote the article I'm quoting in 1987, but his analysis seems to still be valid today. In particular, when we talk about the power to define terrorism, we should talk about the United States of America. As you may know, since 1979, the US government has claimed the right to draw up a list of so-called state sponsors of terrorism. The fact that a single country assumes the power to decide whether other countries are sponsors of terrorism should already be condemned, as this right should only belong to a multilateral organization such as the UN. Indeed, the United States does not have neither the moral nor the legal authority to do so. Furthermore, the criteria for inclusion on the US list are often vague and subjective, leaving room for political manipulation and selective targeting. This means that some nations may find themselves branded as sponsors of terrorism on the basis of geopolitical agendas and strategic interests, not on concrete evidence. At the moment, the aforementioned list includes 4 countries, namely Syria, Cuba, Iran, and the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, better known as North Korea. This shows how the US government only includes in the list those countries that oppose their hegemonic project, unfairly accusing them in order to advance certain geopolitical objectives. Indeed, the list has no credibility at all when we consider the points we have exposed. Moreover, the US fails to hold the actual states sponsors of terrorism accountable. There are glaring omissions, with certain nations escaping scrutiny despite their documented support for extremist groups. Indeed, if the list was more objective, this should include some close Washington allies such as Israel, not to mention the United States of America itself, which should be considered as the main sponsor of world terrorism. While condemning other nations for their alleged support of terrorism, the United States has itself been implicated in sponsoring international terrorism through its military intervention, drone strikes, and support for proxy forces. The glaring double standard undermines the moral authority of the United States and diminishes its credibility as a self-proclaimed leader in the global fight against terrorism. Again, Edward Herman, in 1987, clearly stated that the United States is indeed a sponsor of international terrorism. Not only the United States is a sponsor of international terrorism, but it happens that those countries that they include in their own illegitimate list are among the main victims of the US-sponsored terrorism. Cuba, for example, can be considered as the country that has suffered the greatest number of US-sponsored terrorist attacks in the past 6 decades. Andrew Basevich, professor of international relations and history at Boston University, has stated that in its determination to destroy the Cuban Revolution, the Kennedy administration embarked upon what was in effect a program of state-sponsored terrorism. The United States has provided extensive lethal and non-lethal aid to many Syrian militant groups fighting against the legitimate Syrian government, which is why the Syrian government has directly accused the United States of sponsoring terrorism in Syria. Research found that external support for anti-Assad Syrian rebels significantly augmented the quantity and quality of weapons available to ISIS forces, including anti-tank weapons purchased by the United States that ended up in possession of the Islamic State within 2 months of leaving the factory. These are not isolated cases, as the United States have supported a large number of terrorist organizations all over the world in order to attack those countries that do not accept their hegemonic project. We should not forget the US implication in many tragedies all over the world and the support they offered to the Colombian paramilitary group, to the Nicaraguan Contras, the Kosovo Liberation Army, to MEK in Iran, and to other terrorist organizations all over the world. The US have conducted terrorist actions in Italy as well. During the so-called years of lead, a period of socio-political turmoil in Italy that lasted from the late 1960s into the early 1980s. According to General Gianadelio Maletti, US intelligence services instigated and sponsored right-wing terrorism in Italy during the 1970s as part of the strategy of tension. According to the investigation of Italian judge Guido Salvini, the neo-fascist organizations involved in the strategy of tension, such as La Fenice, Avanguardia Nazionale, Ordine Nuovo, were the troops of clandestine armed forces, directed by components of the state's apparatus related to the CIA. Guido Salvini said that the role of the Americans was ambiguous, halfway between knowing and not preventing, and actually inducing people to commit atrocities. In conclusion, the hypocrisy and double standard employed by the United States in the matter of terrorism are glaring and deeply troubling. While the US government denounces and penalizes other nations for their alleged sponsorship of terrorism, it simultaneously engages in actions that perpetuate violence, destabilization, and human suffering in various parts of the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we are very grateful for the valuable speech of Mr. Giulio Chinappi from Italy for his informative speech. The next speaker of today's speech is Dr. Bobana Andjekovic, journalist, commentator, and expert of geopolitical issues from Serbia, that we invite you to listen to her speech. Thank you very much.
Salam alaikum, Baradar, Khatar, Mon Irani. I would like to thank to our friend Reza Niknam for inviting me to participate in this important event. And I would start with noting several points regarding terrorism, how it was described in the West, and why those notions and concepts of terrorism are just a cover for a falsehood of Western narratives regarding their activities throughout the world. That's why the first step would be dismantling of false narratives. This is the new name for propaganda produced in the West, and it is important to talk about the language before everything else, which is again closely connected to media and media language, how the media generates and how it engineers language in order to deceive people. Actually, media networks are used to forcefully change languages, as if the language is a tool, not a natural gift, which is very important for human thinking and for human expressions, and for human activities in private and public world. Western civilization imposes its own rules as universal values, and it uses various kinds of mechanisms to control public speech. And now the new narrative about public speech, actually it's not so new, but it's widely applied throughout the West, and it's trying to apply it all around the world. It's called political correctness. It is used as a tool in trying to widen its range of influence in the regions where it did not do so or did not do enough, and this is how it is trying to recycle its power by media networks, social engineering, and cancelling, as they say nowadays, for all of those who oppose their concept and don't accept Western values as universal. There is also a frequently used phrase by the Western media camp. It is the phrase rules of engagement, mostly connected to military activities. That kind of phrasing imposes different kinds of false rightness, and the fact that Western officials have some impressions that their own rules for themselves should be somehow rules for everyone and should be universal, not really oblige any country to do so just because it is Western intention. Again, the Western demand that their rules become universal points out at their attitude toward all the other cultures, countries, and people. It means that nothing has changed since the first colonial times. The same principle, but just by other means. Western language also frequently insists on rule of law. Again, the rule of their laws, which is not applicable anywhere else in the world, is intended to be applicable all around the world. Still, it is also a very strong determination of the West to try to maintain its power by different means, sometimes misusing humanity and misusing human relations with each other. And that is how they're trying to apply various of their rules above other people who are even not familiar with those values. The practical example of Western countries' criminal gang behavior is the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. According to White House official, former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs, Michael Kimmett, he said that the red line for the US was killing of a certain American contractor somewhere in Western Asia. Not US soldier, but a contractor. It was not precised. Was the contractor a part of official military troops of US Army, or he was part of some other group, military group or other kind of group, which supports in maybe civilian military partnerships, maybe supports only US Army in various kind of ways. So the information was not complete, but it was announced as official reason for the assassination of General Soleimani. It means that US or UK or EU rules of engagement should be applied in Western Asia or elsewhere. General Soleimani's visit to Baghdad was official and state announced and state visit. The idea to conduct assassination within the green zone area of Baghdad International Airport only proves that the official justification of the assassination of General Soleimani was false. Further, not only to have the idea to kill a state official within the area of protected by international law, but to actually conduct and fulfill that idea points out that entire so-called collective West now present a group of rogue states by their own terms. At the same time, when General Soleimani was assassinated by the order of US President Donald Trump, the same President Trump abolished 4 members of Black Waters, now renamed as Academy, private US mercenary firm, military firm or group, whose members deliberately and for fun killed numerous Iraqis, including children. That again shows that US, UK, EU do not have any consistent state policy, but its closed rules of engagement or rules-based order, as they say, which they want to apply to others, is only a criminal gang behavior in the same way as the criminal gang proclaim their rules are universal. And by violence or not, they're trying to impose them to another people. Even United Nations representatives said at the press conference that assassination of General Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandis and 8 more people organized by US state is an act of international terrorism. The assassination of General Soleimani and others was a step in the attempt to recolonize Western Asia. The same goes for another atrocities conducted both in Western Asia or elsewhere. We may see today situation in occupied Palestine, in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. The cancer of terrorism started to spread across Western Asia with the arrival of Jewish Zionist terrorists. The Zionist entity as a state was made on terrorism. The first terrorist acts in occupied Jerusalem or elsewhere in occupied Palestine, Golan Heights, occupied Lebanon, were done by Jews. Call them Jews, Zionist, whatever. Behind the creation of the Zionist entity were several clans whose interests overlapped. The Zionist entity is just a continuation of the British mandate in Palestine. One of the examples of the continuation is the so-called administrative detention, which is massively used by the Zionist entity occupation toward Palestinians. But it was not invented by Zionists. It was invented and imposed by British. Zionists only continued to use it, as also they continued to use many British legal acts from the British mandate in Palestine. A part of the Western Asia, we may see the same mechanism operating in Ukraine. US and the EU consider Ukraine a business opportunity while trying to confront Russia, which does not want to confront anyone if not attacked. A part of using its military infrastructure on its own soil to assist Ukro-Nazi regime in Kiev, Western states officially and unofficially spend time in government, in military or other institution in Kiev. NATO Secretary General repeatedly stated that NATO cannot allow Russia to win. That is also criminal kind of behavior, or more precisely, psychology of a criminal. Another good example how West operates via criminal and terrorist group, which often overlap, is Kosovo and Metohija and Albania. Western countries helped UČK terrorists in Serbian occupied province of Kosovo and Metohija to maintain power by all means. No signed agreement was obeyed by Shqiptars or also by the West, who were guarantors of the agreements. The other part of Shqiptars are hosting Mojahedin-e-Khalq terrorists in a huge base near Tirana. Both terrorist organizations are supported by the West, and both are commanded by Western state and their security apparatus. Both are always protected by Western state officials, which again mean UČK and MEK are Western stooges, unofficial mercenaries for Western interests. Then we have social engineering imposed in Argentina by its own new president, who at the same time, while conducting destruction of own country and people, supports Israeli genocidal regime. Actually, the behavior of Zionist regime in occupied Palestine and other regimes alike, from Argentina to Ukraine and to Bosnia and Herzegovina, only reflect the core of globalism and the values the Western crime syndicates nurtures, and summarize the last 3 decades of its international policy throughout the world. So-called rules-based order unfolds as dictatorship of the criminal group organized on a global scale. It has its fluid scopes of rules applied opportunistically, and the world should accept to obey those rules as orders. That perverted system of values allow the occupiers to call on their delusional right to self-defend in a country they occupied. These are only several points which can point out that the terrorism, local wars, crawling occupations, colored revolutions, they all come from the same source and they all have the same aim: to maintain or to improve or to sustain colonial system of the West using various ways, means and methods. The problems with that kind of attitude is that sooner or later there will be those who may see beyond engineered reality. Beyond engineered reality there is still common sense, consistency, faith, courage and patriotism of those who cannot accept Western values as universal, especially because they are based on psychopathology, which is being nurtured in Western country throughout the centuries. Nurturing psychopathology brings many social deviations, and those deviant people are now in power in the West. So this is not only the terrorism as a crime, that is also the tool of evilish psychopathological tools and methods which tend to choose no means in conducting its evil plans. This is only one more reason why there should be no stopping by most sane people worldwide to resist that criminal gang which is intending to bring down the world. Thank you.
We thank Dr. Andjekovic for his valuable speech. On the second day of the International Conference of Terrorism State and Non-State Sponsored Versions, we have Dr. Robert Fantina, a university professor, writer, and reporter from Canada. He also is an expert and researcher of MK criminal activities. We invite you to listen to his informative speech. Thank you.
Good day. I'm very grateful to be a part of this esteemed panel today. It is not unusual for government officials to use doublespeak, words and phrases that sound as if they mean one thing, but their meanings are actually far different. We see this in such phrases as state terrorism, state support for terrorism, and non-state terrorism. Let's clear up these definitions now, since they are simply means for various governments to commit crimes against humanity. State terrorism can best be described as violent, intimidating actions by a specific government against its own people, or people living within its borders, or, in the case of Israel and India, actions against an occupied people. Israel, through its in-home terrorist group, the IDF, euphemistically called the Israeli Defense Forces, commits acts of terror against the people of Palestine in the occupied Palestinian territories, and Arabs living within the borders of the apartheid state. It does this through mass arrests without charge of men, women, and children, long-term incarceration without charge or access to legal advice, destruction of homes either as punishment for alleged crimes committed by the homeowners or their relatives, or for other unnamed security purposes, killing people who are doing nothing more than going to school, work, or shops, and in countless other ways. This is described as state terrorism simply because the state, in this case the Zionist entity, is committing those crimes against people over whom they have complete control. At the present time, of course, state terrorism by the apartheid Israeli regime has increased to genocide. We will use Israel again to describe state support for terrorism. In the illegally occupied West Bank, settlers living there illegally on stolen Palestinian land commit countless acts of violence against the Palestinians. They burn their olive trees, evict them from their homes, beat them, steal them, kill them, all not only with complete impunity, but often under the watchful eyes of IDF soldier terrorists. So while the state is not specifically perpetrating these acts of terrorism, it is certainly supporting them. Non-state actors are generally considered political or religious groups with no government affiliation who commit acts of terrorism. However, upon closer investigation, it is often found that these groups are indeed affiliated with a government who is financing, training, and protecting them, and that government is often the United States. We have seen this in its support for ISIS and other groups in Syria and other places, and notably its support for the MEK, an anti-Iran terrorist group. These various definitions, non-state terrorism, and state support for terrorism, blend and merge together, and their nuances are unimportant. Each category of terrorism is just that, actions intended to frighten and intimidate whatever the target population is, and there is no limit to the actions that terrorists will use to accomplish their ugly goals. Murder, rape, kidnapping, destruction of property, assaults on men, women, and children, land theft, deprivation of medical care, the list is endless, and we see these terrorist acts in common use today. The MEK that I mentioned earlier is a clear example of state-supported terrorism in the guise of political organization. This ragtag organization, once condemned by the US and many Western nations, has now been embraced by them. One wonders why. By 2016, out of the nearly 17,000 Iranians killed in terrorist assaults since the victory of Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution, about 12,000 have fallen victim to MEK's terrorist attacks. France is one such country that has embraced the MEK. What, one wonders, has Iran done to incur the wrath of France? Why would France support a terrorist organization whose goal is the overthrow of a popular people's government? Well, the government of Iran worked with the Syrian government, one of its close allies, to defeat US-backed rebels who were attempting to overthrow the Syrian government. Iran also developed defensive weapons to protect its people from a possible attack by the US or apartheid Israel. Yet Iran hasn't invaded another country since 1798. It occupies no countries, and its bombs only fell on terrorist-held sites in Syria at the request of the Syrian government. Why would France object to a nation that honors international alliances, develops an effective defense system, and basically minds its own business on the global stage? France would not, of course, want to displace the mighty US, which attempts with little success to portray Iran as the world's major enemy to peace and justice. No, it is the United States that, with even a superficial study, must be seen as the world's major enemy to peace and justice. Whenever I speak or write about terrorism, the United States is always part of the conversation, as it must be, due to its support for terrorism domestically and globally. Domestically, people of color in the U.S. are not safe anywhere from the racist police forces, which exist to protect whites and their wealth from anyone who might in any way, by employment, education, etc., challenge their way of life. When current President Joe Biden, Genocide Joe as he is now rightly being referred to, was a candidate, he promised police reform. One must not take seriously any promises made by anyone running for office in the United States. The U.S. formerly designated the MEK a terrorist organization, but that changed after it sided with the U.S. against Iraq. When the Iraqi government, with the assistance of human rights activists, finally expelled the majority of MEK members from Iraq, it was the U.S. government, under then-President Barack Obama, who forced Albania to accept them. This was not in the best interests of the people of Albania, but that is never a concern for the U.S. government. However, after 20 years, the MEK has worn out its welcome in Albania. In June of last year, Albanian police raided an MEK camp housing over 1,000 of its members, and its supposed leader, Marian Rajavi, is forbidden from entering the country. Where they will go next is anyone's guess, but it's likely that whatever that destination is, the U.S. will have had a hand in forcing it to accept those terrorists. The U.S., it seems, has come a long way from designating the MEK a terrorist group. At an MEK meeting held in France last year, such a luminary as former Vice President Mike Pence addressed the group, saying that, quote, "The Iranian regime has never been weaker than it is today," close quote, after protests that erupted in September of the previous year. The illustrious Mr. Pence didn't say that the U.S. regime has never been weaker in 2020 when he was still Vice President, and massive demonstrations were held for weeks across the U.S. in protest of police brutality, protests triggered by the police murder of George Floyd. So it seems that massive protests in the U.S. are not worth noting, but in Iran are a sign of weakness and a desire of the people for regime change. U.S. officials are nothing if not hypocritical. Throughout its long and ugly history, the United States has been guilty of non-state terrorism throughout much of the world. Currently, it is financing Israeli genocide of the Palestinians and preventing the end of that genocide, not only through the continued financing of it, but by vetoing United Nations Security Council resolutions that would end it. So terrorism against the Palestinians is being supported by the US, and that could be seen as an example of non-state terrorism. Although I have, throughout this presentation, used the term state terrorism, non-state terrorism, and state support for terrorism, they're all simply different names for the same ugly practices. In most, if not all cases, some government, often the United States, is behind these terrorists, supporting them through financing their deadly illegal activities and providing them diplomatic cover on the world stage. Their methods and goals differ little. Also differing little is the abject suffering these terrorist activities caused their innocent victims. It is long past time for governments who truly support international law and human rights to sanction those who don't. The only thing terrorist supporting governments understand is a threat to their power and profits, and these threats can be made in the form of economic sanctions, refusal to participate in military maneuvers, evicting their foreign military bases from within their borders, reducing the level of diplomatic recognition granted to these rogue nations, and holding them to account in international bodies created for that purpose. Each of us has an obligation to protect the vulnerable members of society. Our governments are in a position to do so, and we must require it of them. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks to Dr. Robert Fantina for his informative speech. The next speaker is Professor Bashir Bellah, a historian, university professor, and writer from Algeria, that we invite you to listen to his speech. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسلام على الجميع. يسرني التحدث في إطار إرهاب الدولة الإسرائيلية عن عنصرين، أولهما إرهاب الدولة الإسرائيلية بحق الفلسطينيين، والثاني اغتيال العلماء الإيرانيين. لقد مارس الكيان الصهيوني ويمارس إرهاب الدولة ويقترف جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية وإبادات جماعية بطريقة سافرة ومكثفة منذ 75 عاما. بداية يشير مصطلح إرهاب الدولة إلى أعمال الإرهاب التي تقوم بها الدولة ضد شعبها أو ضد أهداف أجنبية. وتعرف الموسوعة البريطانية على الإنترنت إرهاب الدولة بأنه العنف المنتظم الذي ترعاه الحكومات ضد المعارضين من مواطنيها أو ضد مجموعات أو حكومات أجنبية، ويشمل ذلك على وجه الخصوص الاحتجاز التعسفي والمحاكمات غير العادلة والتعذيب والاغتيالات. بالنسبة إلى إرهاب الدولة الإسرائيلي، يقول رونن بيرغمان في كتابه انهض وقت الأولا التاريخ السري للاغتيالات الإسرائيلية الصادر عام 2018، يقول منذ الحرب العالمية الثانية اغتالت إسرائيل عددا من الأشخاص يفوق ما نفذته أي دولة غربية أخرى. وأشار إلى اغتيالات المسؤولين البريطانيين وأعضاء حماس وحزب الله وقادة منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية والعلماء النوويين الإيرانيين. يصف الكتاب عمليات القتل المستهدف التي نفذتها الموساد والشباك واستخبارات الجيش والشخصيات المستهدفة والتكتيكات المستخدمة. وقد استوحى الكتاب أو الكاتب عنوان كتابه من عبارة وردت في التلمود تقول: إذا جاء شخص ما ليقتلك بادر واقتله أولا. ويقول إن نسبة كبيرة ممن قابلتهم ذكروا هذه العبارة كمبرر لعملهم. سنعرض سريعا إلى الاحتجاز التعسفي والمحاكمات غير العادلة والتعذيب والاغتيالات. أما معظم ما يجري اليوم في غزة من استهداف للكادر الطبي وللصحفيين ولأفراد الدفاع المدني والتهجير القسري واستخدام الأسلحة المحرمة والقصف العشوائي والعقاب الجماعي والإعدامات الميدانية واستخدام المنشآت المدنية لأغراض عسكرية وإساءة معاملة المعتقلين وإذلالهم وما إلى ذلك من التجاوزات، فإنه يندرج تحت جرائم الحرب والجرائم ضد الإنسانية والإبادة الجماعية أكثر مما يندرج تحت عنوان إرهاب الدولة. إرهاب الدولة الإسرائيلية بحق الفلسطينيين يمكن التحدث عن 4 مظاهر من هذا الإرهاب. أولها الاحتجاز التعسفي، هو اعتقال واحتجاز الأفراد بدون دليل، وكذلك تجاوز حدود الاحتجاز الإداري دون تهمة أو محاكمة بموجب أوامر قابلة للتجديد بناء على معلومات تم حجبها عن المعتقلين والمحامين لفترات تصل إلى عام واحد وأحيانا إلى أجل غير مسمى، ثم إعاقة وصول المعتقل إلى محاميه، والاستخدام الروتيني للإكراه تحت الاستجواب للحصول على اعترافات، والجور الذي توقعه المحاكم على المتهمين، وتشديد ظروف السجن على المحكومين، وتقليص إمكانيات العلاج وزيارات الأقارب. يكفي لإعطاء فكرة عن اتساع نطاق هذه الظاهرة أنه منذ عام 67 تم اعتقال 800,000 فلسطيني، أي ما يقرب من مجموع 20% من مجموع السكان، يعني حوالي 20% من مجموع السكان الفلسطينيين و40% من السكان الذكور، منهم 100,000 شخص رهن اعتقال إداري. كما تعرضت 70% من الأسر الفلسطينية إلى الحكم على أحد أفرادها أو أكثر بالسجن. وفي أبريل 2008 كان هناك 11,000 سجين فلسطيني معتقل لدى الاحتلال، من بينهم 98 امرأة و345 قاصرا و50 عضوا في المجلس التشريعي الفلسطيني و3 وزراء للسلطة الوطنية الفلسطينية. وقالت هيئة شؤون الأسرى والمحررين التابعة لمنظمة التحرير الفلسطينية ونادي الأسير إن قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي اعتقلت أكثر من 6,500 فلسطيني من الضفة وحدها منذ عملية طوفان الأقصى في 7 أكتوبر الماضي. ثاني مظاهر هذا الإرهاب المحاكمات غير العادلة. أهم مظاهرها أن إسرائيل هي الوحيدة في العالم التي تحاكم الأطفال وتحكم بهدم البيوت، وأنها تفتك الاعترافات بالإكراه وتمنع المتهمين من ملاقاة محاميهم، وتسلط على الفلسطينيين عقوبات أكبر من التي يتلقاها اليهود على نفس الجرائم. فمثلا يمكن أن يواجه المراهق الفلسطيني الذي يرمي الحجارة على المركبات العسكرية الإسرائيلية التي تقتحم قريته عقوبة السجن لمدة تصل إلى 20 عاما، في حين أن المستوطن الإسرائيلي الذي يرشق الفلسطينيين بالحجارة لا يواجه سوى عقوبة رمزية قد تتمثل في الخدمة المجتمعية في أسوأ الأحوال. وتحاكم الفلسطينيين في محاكم عسكرية تفتقر إلى شروط وضمانات العدالة بمعدل إدانة يبلغ 99.74%، في حين يبلغ معدل الإدانة في الهجمات الإسرائيلية المبلغ عنها على الفلسطينيين حوالي 1.8%، وغير ذلك. ثالث هذه المظاهر التعذيب. يشمل التعذيب التعرية وخلع حجاب النساء والشتم والتحرش الجنسي ومنع الطعام والماء والضرب والمنع من قضاء الحاجة الطبيعية والصعق بالكهرباء والتقييد لفترات طويلة ومنع الدواء وإطلاق الكلاب. آخر هذه المظاهر الاغتيالات الإسرائيلية للقيادات الفلسطينية. جرائم الاغتيال جزء من الاستراتيجية الأمنية الصهيونية، وقد اكتسبت زخما بقيام الكيان الصهيوني عام 48، حيث حفل تاريخها بالمجازر وعمليات التصفية التي استهدفت العديد من القيادات الفلسطينية ومعارضي المشروع الصهيوني في الداخل والخارج. أما على الصعيد الفلسطيني فإن جرائم الاغتيال الإسرائيلية تواصلت في الداخل والخارج، ولا تكاد توجد عاصمة أوروبية إلا واغتال فيها الموساد الإسرائيلي قياديا أو ناشطا فلسطينيا على الأقل. ولم تسلم العواصم العربية بدورها من تنفيذ اغتيالات إسرائيلية ضد قادة بارزين، بينما تعتبر اغتيالات القادة والنشطاء الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة والضفة مسلسلا متواصلا ما تواصل الصراع. وفيما يلي بعض أشهر هذه الاغتيالات: اغتيال غسان كنفاني عضو المكتب السياسي للجبهة الشعبية لتحرير فلسطين والناطق الرسمي باسمها في بيروت عام 72. اغتيال 3 من القادة البارزين في حركة فتح ببيروت، هم كمال ناصر وكمال عدوان ومحمد يوسف النجار عام 73، علي حسن سلامة في بيروت عام 79، حمدي سلطان ومروان الكيالي ومحمد حسن من مؤسسي الجناح العسكري لحركة الجهاد قبرص 88، خليل الوزير الملقب أبو جهاد في تونس عام 88، صلاح خلف في تونس عام 91، فتح الشقاقي مؤسس حركة الجهاد الإسلامي في فلسطين في مالطا عام 95، يحيى عياش الملقب بالمهندس وهو من أبرز قادة كتائب القسام عام 96، أبو علي مصطفى أمين عم الجبهة الشعبية لتحرير فلسطين في مدينة البيرة عام 2001، رائد الكرمي وهو القائد العام لكتائب شهداء الأقصى عام 2002، أحمد ياسين مؤسس وزعيم حركة حماس عام 2004، عبد العزيز الرنتيسي خليفة الشيخ ياسين في نفس السنة. العنصر الثاني من هذه المداخلة اغتيال العلماء الإيرانيين. رغم عدم تبني الكيان الصهيوني رسميا لهذه الاغتيالات، إلا أن وسائل الإعلام الصهيونية لا تتردد في نسبتها إلى دولتهم، كما أن قرينة اغتيال الكيان لعلماء الذرة العرب سابقا وكذا قيادات حركات المقاومة في المنطقة كلها تجزم بمسؤوليته المباشرة. ووفقا لتحليلات بعض المحللين السياسيين، فقد نفذت هذه العمليات بيد عناصر مجاهدي خلق الإرهابية بدعم وتدريب من قبل الموساد. وفيما يلي أهم تلك الاغتيالات اغتيال مسعود محمدي أستاذ الفيزياء النووية في جامعة طهران بواسطة انفجار دراجة نارية مفخخة في شمالي العاصمة. وضعت الدراجة بالقرب من سيارته وتم تفجيرها بالتحكم عن بعد حين مروره من قربها في 12 يناير 2010. اغتيال مجيد شهرياري العالم النووي الإيراني في شمال طهران في نفس السنة. اغتيال حسن طهراني مقدم أبو البرنامج الصاروخي الإيراني عام 2011. اغتيال داريوش رضائي نجاد أمام منزله في طهران في ذات العام. اغتيال مصطفى أحمد روشن أستاذ الفيزياء النووية في انفجار قنبلة مغناطيسية لصقت على سيارته في طهران عام 2012. ولعل أهم اغتيال أو أخطر هذه الاغتيالات اغتيال العالم النووي الإيراني محسن فخري زادة عام 2020. لكن يبدو أن كل ذلك لم ومعه العقوبات الأمريكية والغربية الظالمة على مدى 40 عاما فشلت فشلا ذريعا، بحيث أنها أخفقت في تركيع الشعب الإيراني وثني إيران عن تطوير برنامجها النووي والسير قدما على درب العزة والمنعة والتقدم، والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Okay, we are very grateful for the valuable speech of Professor Bashir Bellah from Algeria for his speech. The next speaker of today's speech is Dr. Maria Morigi, author, archaeologist, journalist, and religious researcher from Italy, that we invite you to listen to her speech. Thank you.
In December 2023, airstrikes and border incursions by Tehran's frontier guards occurred in the border area between Iran and Pakistan. However, tensions were quickly eased. On December 16, at the Davos Economic Forum, Iran's Foreign Minister H. Amir Abdullahian stated, "We have only faced Iranian terrorists on Pakistani territory. No civilians from Pakistan, a friendly and fraternal country, have been hit by Iranian missiles and drones. The Jaish al-Adl group, an Iranian terrorist group that takes refuge in areas of the Pakistani province of Balochistan, was targeted." In January 2024, former Pakistani ambassador and Foreign Minister Shamshad Ahmad Khan, in a Pakistani TV broadcast, acknowledged the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic of Iran's concerns about the terrorist threat at the borders and criticized Pakistan for inadequate measures in preventing terrorist attacks near Iranian borders. Ahmad Khan also asserted that the United States and the Zionist regime deliberately support and finance the Jaish al-Adl group with the aim of damaging Iran and Pakistan relations and regional security. Jaish al-Adl, Army of Justice, designated as a terrorist organization by Iran, Japan, New Zealand, and the USA, has collaborated with Kurdish separatist groups and denounced Iranian intervention in the Syrian civil war. For years, the terrorist group, founded in 2012 and fighting for the independence of Iranian Sistan and Balochistan, has carried out terrorist actions against Iran from Pakistani territory. Therefore, a deeper understanding of Balochistan is necessary. It is a geographic region, arid and mountainous, bordering the Arabian Sea and spanning three borders with Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. It is inhabited by the Baloch ethnic community, mostly nomadic, which considers itself marginalized, despite the territory's wealth in natural gas, coal, and minerals, and excluded from the economic and commercial benefits offered by the port of Gadar on the Arabian Sea, the endpoint of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, known CPEC, a branch of the Belt and Road Initiative, known BRI. Independence movements in Pakistani Balochistan began in 1948 with the transfer of the former British domain, the Khanat of Kalat, to Pakistan. While the transfer treaty guaranteed the Khanat's independence, it vested all governing functions in Pakistan. Thus, the region experienced a series of separatist, irredentist insurgencies aimed at realizing the Greater Balochistan. In Pakistan, it is the largest province, with Quetta as its capital, and most at risk of terrorism. Revolts erupted in this region in 1948, 1958-59, in 1962-63, and 1973-1977, involving the Balochistan Liberation Front, known as BLF, a group founded by Jumna Khan in 1964 in Damascus, which also played a significant role in the 1968-1973 insurgency in the Iranian province of Sistan and Balochistan. The BLF insurgency was defeated both in Pakistan and Iran, but seemed to re-emerge in 2004 under the leadership of Allah Nazar Bluch, conducting attacks against civilians, journalists, government officials, and the military, such as the BLF's claim of responsibility for the Turbat fish market bombing in January 2023. This new low-intensity insurgency since 2003 has posed significant security challenges to both Pakistan and Iran, both grappling with local Sunni jihadist groups. Ethno-nationalist demands for greater autonomy from Pakistan have merged with protests regarding resource distribution, which the Pakistani government is accused of favoring the Punjabi ethnic majority in the area. In addition to Sunni jihadist extremism, anti-Indian irredentism is also gaining strength. Today, the most significant militant group in the border area is the Baloch Liberation Army, BLA, the largest in the galaxy of independence movements. The BLA movement, born in 2000, inherits the legacy of movements from the 1970s, especially the BLF. Its leader is Kahir Baksh Mari, belonging to one of the two powerful tribes, Mari and Bukti, that occupy vast areas in the north, Mari in major mining areas, and in the south, Bukti near the strategic port of Gadar. In addition to the Sunni separatist and nationalist of the BLA, for about a decade, groups like the aforementioned Jaish al-Adl and Ansar al-Furqan, another Sunni Baloch armed group also operating in Iran have joined. Since 2013, the year of the first attack by Jaish al-Adil militants, Iran and Pakistan have viewed each other with suspicion. Each side blames the other for turning a blind eye to militants. Pakistan claims to have shared evidence with Iran of the presence of Baloch separatists in Iran launching cross-border attacks against Pakistani troops and claims to have arrested Jaish al-Adil members responsible for attacks in Iran. All of this is concerning due to the fracture that could develop within the BRICS alliance. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Indeed, since January 1st, 2024, Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and notably Iran have officially joined BRICS, and Pakistan has also requested to participate. China, for its part, recommends moderation to all working to mitigate tensions. Therefore, it is understandable why Western media denounce this escalation of conflicts in area close to Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, Red Sea. In fact, the terrorism hotspots are largely a consequence of Western neo-colonial policy, which armed anti-Shiite groups everywhere and conducted a devastating war of sanctions. The recent acts of hetero-directed terrorism in Iran are evidence of this. On January 3rd, 2024, in the city of Kerman, near the tomb of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, 87 dead and hundreds injured, claimed by IS, and the killing of 11 policemen in the city of Rask in eastern Iran.
Okay, many thanks to Dr. Morigi for her speech. Here on the second day of terrorism, state and non-state sponsored versions, we hope that this conference can take an effective step in revealing the terrorist group of the MK and other terrorist groups of the world, and the information presented in this conference can be used as university researches. I feel it is necessary to express my gratitude and appreciation on behalf of Terror Spring Institute for the speakers and the participants in this international conference. I invite all dear ones to pay attention to the final statement of the Terrorism State and Non-State Sponsored Versions Conference. Thank you once again. The closing statement of the current Conference of Terrorism, State and Non-State Sponsored Versions. We would like to thank the cultivated professors, elites, and scientists who have come to fulfill the rights of the oppressed people and those who have inscribed some of the most heinous crimes in history committed by the anti-human terror groups like the Mojahedin-e-Khalq, in the hope that no injustice will be committed against humanity in any part of the world. Freedom, justice, security, and peace are the valuable rights of the human beings, and ignoring these rights of the part of the various groups and some governments is a clear act of terrorism and violation of basic human rights. Today, terrorism is a common human that has endangered human dignity and the security of societies, and confronting it also requires the efforts and mobilization of the conscious minds. The Terror Spring Institute considers freedom, justice, security, and peace to be the common goal of all nations and governments, and emphasize that all individuals, institutions, and non-governmental and international organizations always consider these rights and take serious measures at the national and international level to strengthen and realize them. We believe that the security situation of the international environment and the performance of national, regional, and international actors have had a significant impact on the formation and expansion of terrorism cells at different levels, and to deal with this requires a fundamental change in the attitude towards the phenomenon of terrorism with the consensus of elites and politicians and in the form of international legal institutions. We consider terrorism to be an important obstacle to the realization of peace and justice, which has been formed and expanded due to legitimate greed, lack of moral leadership, and disregard for the political and religious values of nations. while emphasizing the valuable rights of nations to determine their own destiny. We condemn any violation of territorial integrity and land occupation, racism, and any kind of domination in the name of countering terrorism. And we use any instrumental, selective, and unilateral actions to confront the phenomenon of terrorism. The ideological dimensions of the intellectual foundation of terrorism are much more dangerous and deep-rooted than its physical manifestations, and the need to deal with it requires intellectual and cultural measures that the elites of the world must take in this way. We believe that religions and moral systems can seek a way to align views by emphasizing common human characteristics and religious beliefs, and in this regard, dialogue between the religions can be a practical foundation for a sustainable global alliance to eradicate terrorism. We unanimously emphasizing it is the right of all human beings to defend themselves against any discrimination and oppression. Therefore, the fighters of the countries of Palestine, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen will stand against foreign occupation and defend their family, land, and national honor, use their legitimate right to defend themselves, and should be supported in the fight against terrorism. While emphasizing the prosecution and punishment of terrorists based on international laws and maintaining human dignity and respect for the fundamental principles of humanitarianism and human dignity, we consider the prevention and destruction of terrorism based on natural principles and divine and moral standards to be a necessary action. Now, in the end, we are here to invite international human rights organizations and international legal forums to prosecute the terrorist group Mojahedin-e-Khalq and other terrorists by creating fact-finding groups. Those who have protected themselves from the judgment of legal circles for many years